Welcome back, everybody. Today we're going to deep dive into something that's well, it's a Reddit post that really kind of just blew up and sparked this huge conversation online.
Yeah, it all started on AskMenAdvice, which is a subreddit that's, usually guys going for advice. But in this case, it was a woman who posted about how she had behaved towards men, and it just ignited a ton of responses.
Thousands,
Uh,
thousands of comments just flooding in, and you had these supportive guys, and then others that were really skeptical.
hmm
And I think it really exposed something deeper,
Hmm.
about how we think about gender. So, what do you think it was about this post that caused such a reaction?
Well, I think it's interesting because it seemed like a simple apology on the surface, but it really triggered this huge spectrum of responses. So basically, the woman, she was expressing remorse for how she acted in the past, admitted to having this like use or be used mentality. She partly attributed it to, some of her negative experiences in modeling and athletics. But people saw this as more than an apology. They were seeing it as like, oh, so this is how all women are, or like she's just doing this for attention.
So from the very beginning, you've got this, clash of
Yeah.
interpretations. Some are seeing it as, she's really sorry. Other people are like, nah, this is just calculated.
Yeah.
It's like everybody's projecting their own, experiences onto this woman's story. So let's unpack it a little. What was she actually apologizing for? What were the behaviors?
So she described this whole pattern of behavior that a lot of people found troubling. She talked about like going on a bunch of dates every week, just to get fancy dinners. She was using her dad's money to get attention. She was relying on men to solve all her problems, even just flirting, to feel better about herself. And she said she felt really disturbed and embarrassed to learn about how men are often treated.
Hmm. It's interesting. She connected this behavior to her experience as a model and an athlete. Do you think this is legit? Like she's trying to explain herself?
Yeah.
Or is it just a way to avoid taking responsibility?
I think that is the core question here. It really gets into the psychology of apologies. Because a real apology, it takes real self-awareness, accountability, right? And while she does say, she knows she caused harm, she frames her past as if she was like radicalized by the media and preyed upon by these male-dominated industries. So it begs the question, is she taking responsibility or is she trying to shift the blame?
And it's that ambiguity that, just added fuel to the fire in the comments. So let's dive into those reactions. What about the supportive comments? What did those look like?
So some men, they seemed genuinely moved by her apology. They were offering encouragement, saying they understood. Some even shared their own stories about getting hurt in relationships. So there was this sense of, shared vulnerability.
It's nice to see that kind of empathy online,
Mhm.
you know, especially where things can get so toxic.
Yeah.
You also mentioned the skepticism. So what were people saying who weren't buying it?
A lot of users questioned if she was being real. They said it sounded like a classic pick-me, just trying to get attention from men. And that pick-me label, it's often used to criticize women who try to separate themselves from other women.
Yeah.
So it shows the cynicism about women online. It suggests that anytime a woman criticizes herself or agrees with men, it's seen as manipulation, not genuine.
It's a really interesting point. It really highlights this distrust that we see online, right?
Hmm.
And some commenters went even further. They were saying that she was actually a guy pretending to be a woman, just trying to stir things up.
Right. And that really says a lot about the tension and the stereotypes around gender online. It's like people were so stuck in their beliefs about men and women that they couldn't even imagine a woman actually changing her mind and taking responsibility for what she did.
So you have this whole range of reactions, everything from empathy and forgiveness to just not believing her at all and saying she's manipulating people. It's almost like this post became a Rorschach test.
Mhm.
You know, everyone saw what they wanted to see based on their own ideas about gender. It makes you wonder, what does it actually take for an apology to be seen as real, especially online where there's so much distrust already?
That's such a good question, because it does feel like we're always trying to figure out what people really mean online. Like, is this person being sincere or do they have some other agenda? It's almost impossible to tell sometimes, especially with something like gender dynamics.
It's like everyone's bringing their own baggage to this conversation, right? Like their own experiences with getting hurt or betrayed or just all the pressures from society. And all that gets put onto this one woman's story.
Yeah,
And it makes it hard to have a real, a nuanced conversation about what's going on.
exactly. It's like a huge reminder that online you don't have those little cues you have in person,
Mhm.
like body language or tone of voice.
Mhm.
So it's easy to misunderstand what someone means online because you're only getting a small piece of the picture.
Yeah.
And that can just make things worse, reinforce those biases instead of helping people understand each other.
So how do we get past all that noise online? How do we know if an apology is just for show or if someone's really sorry and wants to change? Are there things we can look for?
I think one thing to look at is, does the person focus more on how they feel or on how they hurt other people? In this case, the woman spent a lot of time talking about her own struggles and what led her to act that way. And that's important context. But a really good apology should focus on the people who got hurt.
So it's about showing empathy
Right.
and taking ownership of the consequences.
Yeah.
Not just explaining your actions away.
Yes, exactly. And another important thing is, does the person say how they're going to make things right? Did she try to contact any of the men she hurt? Did she say she was going to change how she acts in the future? Because those actions mean a lot more than just words, especially when people are already skeptical.
That makes sense.
Mm.
It's about showing that you're really committed to growing and changing as a person.
Mm-hmm.
But, even when someone seems sincere, there's still this suspicion and cynicism, especially when it comes to gender roles.
Yeah, it's interesting how this post showed all these stereotypes people have about men and women. Some guys were really quick to forgive her, almost like they were happy to see a woman admitting to acting this way. Like it confirmed what they already believed about women being manipulative.
Like it fits into this idea that men are always getting tricked,
Mm.
like they're just innocent victims. On the other hand, you have people who instantly call her a pick-me or say she's actually a man. It's like they can't even accept the idea the woman could genuinely regret her actions and want to be better.
And that reaction really shows how much distrust and cynicism there is about women online. Like, people assume that women are always putting on a show, always trying to impress men. So anything they do, even apologizing, is seen through that lens. And it makes it hard for women to break free from those expectations.
It's like a never-ending cycle. The more we keep repeating those stereotypes, the harder it gets to have real conversations about gender and personal growth. But some people also brought up bigger societal issues. Some talked about how media and algorithms shape how we see gender.
Right. We can't forget about how much our media and environment affects us. Think about all the headlines we see every day that pit men against women, like men are trash or women are crazy. Even if it's meant to be funny, it can still make those stereotypes worse. And it makes it harder to have real conversations.
It's like we're constantly being fed these extreme views, so it becomes easier to think of things as us versus them.
Right. And algorithms make it worse because they create these echo chambers where we only see things that agree with us. So even if we're trying to be open-minded, the way these platforms are designed makes it really hard to see things from other perspectives.
You're so right. We get stuck in these filter bubbles, surrounded by information that just confirms what we already think. And that makes it really tough to understand different points of view and have productive conversations about these complicated issues, like gender dynamics. It's like we're stuck in this web, of algorithms and societal pressures and our own biases. And it makes it so hard to have good conversations about gender.
Yeah.
I mean, honestly, it can feel kind of overwhelming. Where do we even go from here? How do we move past these online debates and actually create understanding and respect, in real life?
Yeah, it's a tough thing to navigate, that's for sure. But I think the first step is just acknowledging how complex this whole issue is. We're talking about these deep societal norms and personal experiences, and then you have online communication, which is constantly changing, so there's no easy fix.
Yeah.
No magic solution to make it all better.
So it's about being humble, I guess.
Right.
Realizing that we all have blind spots and biases that we bring into these conversations.
Exactly. It's about listening to each other with empathy. Really trying to see where the other person is coming from, even if their view is totally different from ours, and being willing to question our own assumptions and be open to the possibility that we might be wrong.
It sounds like a lot of this is about inner work. We need to look at our own beliefs and biases before we can even start having good conversations with other people.
Absolutely. Self-reflection is key.
Right.
We need to be aware of how we're interpreting the world and be ready to adjust that when we learn new information or hear different perspectives.
That's a really good point.
Cool.
So what are some things we can do in our everyday lives to build more understanding and respect? How do we take these ideas and actually make a difference?
Well, one practical thing is to pay attention to the language we use. Are we using words that reinforce stereotypes even if we don't mean to? Are we speaking for an entire gender, or are we acknowledging that everyone has their own unique experience?
Language is so powerful, right? It shapes how we think about the world.
It really does. And another thing we can do is speak up when we see sexism or bias. Whether it's in our personal lives or in the media we consume, it might be uncomfortable sometimes. But even small actions like that can make a difference.
Even just challenging a sexist joke or having a conversation with someone who has biased views. Those things can plant seeds for change.
Exactly. And lastly, I think it's important to remember that change starts with us. We can't control how other people act, but we can control ourselves. We can choose to engage in respectful dialogue even when it's hard. We can choose to educate ourselves and challenge our own biases.
It's about taking responsibility for creating a more just world. So as we wrap up this deep dive into this really fascinating and sometimes frustrating Reddit thread, what's the main takeaway you want to leave our listeners with?
I think the most important thing to remember is that conversations about gender are complicated. There are no easy answers. We're all learning and growing. It's not about blaming each other. It's about being open and honest, even when it's uncomfortable.
It's about remembering that we're all human and treating each other with empathy and trying to understand each other.
Thank you so much for sharing your insights today. It's been a really eye-opening conversation.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me. And to all our listeners, thanks for joining us on this deep dive. If you connected with this conversation, we'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment on Shauna Plage's YouTube channel or connect with us on social media. And if you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to like and subscribe to Voices of the Soul for more deep dives into the human experience. Until next time.